My wife kissed me goodbye and said, "It's just a business trip. Stop overthinking everything." I smiled and helped her load her suitcase into the taxi. She never realized I already knew she wasn't traveling alone. The moment her flight took off, I made one quiet decision. 3 days later, she started calling me nonstop after someone told her what I'd done. I'm 37, married for 6 years, and for the last 2 of those years, I've gotten really good at pretending I don't notice things. We built a good life on paper. Nice house in a quiet neighborhood, stable jobs, the kind of routine most people would call comfortable. We had a Sunday morning ritual of making pancakes together. We had a shared calendar with color-coded events. We had inside jokes that had lasted years. From the outside, we looked like the couple other people pointed to and said, "See, it's possible." I used to believe that too. She travels for work a few times a year, conferences and client meetings, nothing unusual for her industry. I never questioned it. Why would I? Trust isn't something you audit every week. You build a life with someone, and you extend them the basic decency of believing what they tell you, because the alternative is exhausting and corrosive and turns you into someone you don't want to be. Except about 4 months ago, small things started accumulating. Her phone face down on the counter more often than before. A new habit of taking calls in the bathroom with the fan running. New lingerie in the back of the closet that never made an appearance around me. Tags still half attached like she'd forgotten to remove them or hadn't planned on me finding them at all. A separate hotel loyalty account I discovered by accident when I was booking my own trip using our shared rewards login. One with a different email address linked to it. One I didn't recognize until I realized it was a variation of her name, with numbers I later figured out were her college graduation year. None of these things individually meant anything. I told myself that constantly. Phones face down could mean nothing. Bathroom calls could be about anything, maybe even something embarrassing like a doctor's appointment she didn't want to discuss. New lingerie could be for me, eventually, a surprise she hadn't gotten around to revealing. I built an entire architecture of innocent explanations because the alternative felt too heavy to hold. But architecture built on denial collapses eventually. And mine did the week she announced this last trip. Update 1. She told me about the trip on a Tuesday evening while we were both in the kitchen, her chopping vegetables for dinner and me setting the table like we did most nights. "I have to go to a conference next week," she said, not looking up from the cutting board. 3 days, client stuff, it's going to be boring but necessary. "Where?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She named a city a few hours' flight away. "I'll be back Thursday night. You'll survive without me for 3 whole days," she added with a small laugh, the kind meant to close the topic before it opened further. I said something normal, something like, "I'll miss you, but I'll manage." And we moved on to talking about dinner plans. But something about the way she delivered the information, too casual, too rehearsed, stuck with me. 2 nights before she left, I was using our shared laptop to book a rental car for an upcoming work trip of my own. Her email was still logged in from earlier that day. I wasn't snooping, not really, not at first. I just needed to check something in our shared calendar. But an email notification popped up on the screen, a flight confirmation, and out of habit, I glanced at it. 2 passengers. Same flight, same dates as the trip she'd described to me. One was her name. The other was a name I didn't recognize. A man's name. Seat assignment right beside hers. I sat there for a long time, staring at that screen. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I think some part of me had already known, had been building toward this moment for months without letting myself admit it consciously. Finding actual proof didn't feel like a shock. It felt like confirmation of something I'd been avoiding. I didn't say anything that night. I went to bed at my normal time. I let her fall asleep next to me, her breathing steady and unaware, while I lay there running through what I already knew and what I needed to find out. The next morning, I called my brother-in-law, her younger brother, who handles a chunk of the vendor-side accounting at her company, including expense report processing. I didn't tell him what I suspected. I framed it as wanting to book something similar for a surprise anniversary trip and needing to see what kind of expense report categories the company typically approved for business travel. He didn't think twice. Family helping family, no red flags raised. Next, I quietly began the process of separating our finances where I could. We'd been discussing refinancing the mortgage for months, and most of our credit lines were technically under my name with her as an authorized user rather than a co-signer. A detail from early in our marriage neither of us had thought much about since. I started the paperwork to adjust those authorizations. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just quiet administrative housekeeping that would take about 72 hours to fully process. Then I did the thing that actually mattered most. Her best friend, the one who'd stood beside her as maid of honor at our wedding 6 years ago, had been noticeably distant with me for months. I'd chalked it up to her being busy with her own life, her own family. But something told me the distance wasn't circumstantial. It was guilt. I sent her a simple text on Wednesday morning, the day before my wife's flight. "Hey, I know something's been going on for a while. I'm not asking you to betray anyone's trust. I just need to know if I'm right to be worried." She called me within 10 minutes. I could hear her voice shaking before she even said a full sentence. "I've wanted to tell you for so long," she said, practically in tears. I told her she needed to end it or tell you herself. I told her every single week. I couldn't keep carrying this. "How long?" I asked. "Almost 8 months," she said. "It's someone from her old job. They reconnected at an industry event last year and it didn't stop." "You don't owe her any more silence," I told her. "Thank you for finally telling me." She apologized about 6 more times before we hung up, each apology heavier than the last, like she'd been storing them up for months waiting for permission to release them. That evening, my wife packed her suitcase while I sat downstairs pretending to watch television. She came down around 9 wearing pajamas, said she was tired and heading to bed early since her flight was at 9 a.m. the next morning. I told her I'd drive her to the airport. She said that wasn't necessary, a cab would be easier since I'd have to fight traffic getting back for work. I didn't push the point. I already knew why she preferred it that way. Update 2. Thursday morning, the day of her flight, she came downstairs, already dressed for travel, suitcase rolling behind her. She looked good. Not just normal good, but effort good, the kind of put together most people reserve for someone they're trying to impress rather than 3 hours in an airport terminal. "You look nice for a boring conference," I said, keeping my tone light. She laughed, brushing it off. "Gotta look professional. First impressions and all that." I helped her load the suitcase into the taxi when it arrived at 7:15 a.m. The driver popped the trunk, I lifted the bag in, and she turned to kiss me goodbye on the front step. "It's just a business trip," she said, noticing something in my expression I hadn't managed to fully hide. "Stop overthinking everything." I smiled. "I'm not overthinking anything. Have a safe flight." She smiled back, relieved, like she'd successfully talked me down from a suspicion she assumed was baseless. She got in the taxi, rolled down the window, and waved as it pulled away. I stood in the driveway until the car disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside and got to work. The first call I made was to my lawyer, someone I'd actually consulted with weeks earlier once the suspicions first started piling up, though I hadn't taken any formal steps until now. Most of
the groundwork was already prepared. All that remained was deciding timing. "I want the papers ready today," I told her, "but I don't want her served until she's back home." "Understood," my lawyer said. "Strategic reasons or personal ones?" "Both," I said. "I want her to enjoy every second of this trip before she understands what it cost her." My lawyer didn't ask any further questions. She said she'd have everything finalized by the time my wife's flight landed on Thursday. Throughout the day, my wife texted me photos from the conference. Generic shots of a hotel lobby, a conference room with rows of empty chairs, a name badge with her name printed on cardstock. All the visual evidence of legitimacy carefully staged. I responded normally each time. "Looks productive." Miss you already. I wasn't lying about missing the version of her I'd believed existed for 6 years. That person, apparently, had been partially fictional for at least 8 months. That evening, around 7 p.m., she called during what she described as a break between sessions. Her voice had a lightness to it I hadn't heard directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. "This trip has honestly been really good for me," she said. "I needed this. Some time to just breathe and focus on myself." I bit back every response building in my chest and simply said, "That's good. You deserve some time to recharge." She asked how my day had been, and I told her about a normal work meeting, some traffic on the way home, nothing of substance. We talked for maybe 10 more minutes before she said she needed to get back to a networking dinner. I told her to have fun. She said she would. Update 3. Behind the scenes, that same evening, my brother-in-law sent over the expense report I'd asked about, framed innocently as research for my own upcoming trip. It confirmed everything I already suspected. 2 hotel rooms had been booked using the company card, listed under different guest names, but both charged to the same corporate account. The minibar and room service charges on one of the rooms were doubled, consistent with 2 people sharing space rather than one solo traveler using minimal amenities. There was also a dinner receipt for 2 at a restaurant located 40 minutes outside the conference venue's district, well outside walking distance of anywhere a typical attendee would casually wander for a meal between sessions. The kind of restaurant you choose specifically because it's far enough away that you won't run into coworkers. I sat at my kitchen table that night with printouts spread in front of me, building a complete picture of a trip she thought was airtight. Every piece of evidence just confirmed what her best friend had already told me on the phone 2 days earlier. Friday, her second day away, followed a similar pattern. More staged photos, another call where she described the trip as refreshing, using language that felt increasingly foreign coming from someone I'd shared a bed with for 6 years. At one point she said, "It's nice to just feel like myself again for a few days." And I wondered privately what version of herself she meant, and how long that version had been buried under the life we'd built together, or whether it had ever really existed the way I thought it had. Saturday, her flight home was scheduled for 6:45 p.m. I checked the flight tracker obsessively that afternoon, watching the little plane icon crawl across the map on my phone screen. When it finally took off, right on schedule, something settled in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like resolve hardening into something unshakable. I opened my email and told my lawyer to proceed. Papers filed, timeline locked in. I wanted this handled the moment she walked back through our front door, thinking everything was still normal.
I drove to the airport that evening to pick her up, because showing up felt important, felt like maintaining the illusion just a little longer so the eventual reveal would land with maximum weight. She came through arrivals looking tanned somehow, despite 3 days at an indoor conference, hairstyled differently than she usually wore it for work trips. She hugged me tightly at the gate area, said she'd missed me, said the trip had been exhausting, but worth it professionally. I carried her suitcase to the car, made small talk about traffic, asked how the conference sessions had gone. "Really productive," she said, rattling off vague phrases about industry trends and networking opportunities, and a keynote speaker whose name she couldn't quite remember. I nodded along, asking a follow-up question here and there to keep the conversation moving, watching her improvise details for a conference I now knew she'd barely attended. Update 4. We got home around 9 p.m. She went upstairs immediately to unpack, saying she wanted to get the suitcase emptied before she forgot, and it sat there for a week like usual. I sat downstairs in the kitchen with a manila folder placed neatly on the table. "Hey," I called up the stairs, "can you come down for a second? Someone dropped something off for you while you were gone." She came down a few minutes later in comfortable travel clothes, hair pulled back, looking tired but relaxed in a way I now recognized as something closer to satisfaction than exhaustion. She saw the folder sitting on the table and picked it up, confused, flipping it open without any real suspicion. Inside were the divorce papers, formally filed that same afternoon. Beneath them, a printed copy of the second plane ticket showing both names side by side. Same flight, same dates. Beneath that, the expense report highlighting the doubled charges and the suspicious dinner receipt. And on top of everything, a printed screenshot of a text conversation her best friend had forwarded me weeks ago without me even asking. One where my wife had described me, her husband, as convenient but boring, and described the other man as making her feel alive again for the first time in years. Her face drained of color as she read through the pages, flipping faster and faster like she was hoping something further down would explain it all away. "Where did you get this?" she finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter? I can explain everything, just let me." "You don't need to explain," I said, my voice calm in a way that seemed to unsettle her more than shouting would have. "I already know." Update 5. This is where things got loud, because up until this point, I'd been the calm one, the quiet one, the one making decisions while she was 3 time zones away, enjoying herself on someone else's dime. Once she understood the trip she just returned from was the final chapter of her marriage, she stopped being calm too. "You had me served with divorce papers before I even landed?" Her voice climbed with each word. "You've been planning this entire time I was gone?" "I've been planning this since I found the second ticket in your email," I said. "You just didn't know that I knew." "So you knew, and you still helped me with my suitcase? You still kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong? Who does that?" "I did," I said, "because I wanted you to enjoy every second of your trip before you had to deal with what came after it." She started crying then, the kind of crying I've since learned to differentiate from genuine remorse, the kind that comes purely from getting caught rather than from actual regret over the choices that led there. "I made a mistake," she said between sobs. "People make mistakes. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. 6 years has to count for something." "There's nothing to fix," I said, keeping my voice level even as my chest tightened. "A mistake is forgetting to pick something up at the store. This was 8 months of decisions, one after another. Every single day you chose to keep lying was a fresh decision, not a slip." She shifted tactics then, moving from tears to anger in the span of a single breath. "You're really going to throw away 6 years over this? You're being dramatic. Everyone has a moment of weakness at some point." 8 months isn't a moment," I said, "and I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that months ago. I'm just handling the paperwork now." She grabbed her phone off the counter and started making calls, pacing through the kitchen. First her mother, who I could hear yelling through the phone speaker about how I was overreacting, how real marriages survive far worse, how she needed to fight for her family instead of accepting papers without a conversation. Then her best friend, and I watched my wife's expression shift in real time from anger to raw betrayal as she pieced together exactly who had given me the information that made everything unravel. "You told him!" she screamed into the phone, pacing faster now. "After everything I told you in confidence, you actually told him everything?" I couldn't hear the response clearly, but whatever her friend said made my wife go quiet, then hang up abruptly without saying goodbye, phone clattering onto the counter. That night, she slept in the guest room without me even suggesting it. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up, presumably to her mother's house, suitcase from her trip still sitting half unpacked in our bedroom, like a monument to everything that had just ended. Update 6. 3 days after she'd landed, my phone started ringing nonstop. Not just calls, but a steady stream of texts too, ranging from apologetic to furious depending entirely on the hour and how much wine I assumed had been involved. I learned later that someone from her office had told her something that shifted the entire tone of her communication toward me almost overnight. Turns out the other man's wife had discovered the affair around the same time through a completely separate channel, something involving a shared calendar application that had synced automatically across old devices still linked from before an earlier separation years prior. Small world, worse timing for everyone involved. His wife had gone to his office in person, causing a scene loud enough that building security got involved, and in the aftermath of that confrontation, details about the trip, the hotel, the doubled charges, all came spilling out publicly. Word spread through their shared workplace circles fast, the way these things always do. My wife's professional reputation, something she'd spent years carefully building, took a direct and immediate hit. Colleagues started treating her differently. Whispers in hallways, sideways glances in meetings, the particular kind of quiet workplace ostracism that doesn't require an official verdict to feel like a punishment handed down by everyone at once. That's when the calls to me really escalated. One voicemail, left around midnight, her voice shaking with something between anger and humiliation. Everyone at work knows now. I'm humiliated beyond anything I've ever felt. This is your fault too, for filing so fast, for not giving us any chance to handle this privately before it became a spectacle. I didn't call back for 2 full days. When I finally did, it was only because my lawyer suggested that completely ignoring her might complicate the remaining proceedings around asset division. You didn't do this to yourself quietly, I said when she picked up. You did this with someone who apparently forgot to mention his own business trip to his own wife. That part isn't on me. You could have handled all of this with some dignity, she said, her voice tired now rather than furious. Instead, you humiliated me in front of everyone. I helped carry your suitcase to a taxi and wished you a safe flight, I said. You did the humiliating part entirely on your own. I just finally stopped covering for it. She went quiet for a long moment. Is there really no chance we could fix any of this? No, I said. There isn't. Final update. The divorce took about 4 months to fully finalize, faster than most given the circumstances, mostly because she didn't have much fight left in her once the affair became public knowledge across her workplace and among our mutual friend group. She walked away with her personal belongings, her car, and nothing else of significance. No alimony, given the relatively short duration of the marriage relative to our combined assets and the clear grounds established. The house remained with me since it had technically been purchased before we married. The other man's marriage ended too, from what I heard secondhand through mutual acquaintances, though I made a deliberate point of not actively following that particular story. Some small, petty part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction knowing his life had imploded around the same time hers did, but mostly I just felt tired by the entire situation, ready to close the book on it completely. My ex-wife ended up leaving her job about 6 weeks after the news fully spread through her office. Whether she was quietly pushed out or left entirely on her own terms, I never confirmed, and honestly never cared enough to ask. Last I heard through distant mutual connections, she'd relocated to a different city altogether, presumably chasing a fresh start somewhere nobody knew the details of what happened. Her best friend and I still talk occasionally, mostly just checking in. She felt guilty for a long stretch of time about telling me everything, worried it had permanently damaged whatever friendship remained between her and my ex-wife, but I made it clear repeatedly how grateful I was. She didn't create the affair, she just finally stopped protecting it. I still live in the same house we once shared. It carries a different energy now, quieter but somehow lighter, like the walls themselves had been holding tension I hadn't fully registered until it was gone. I redid the guest room a few months back, repainted it, changed the furniture entirely, partly practical and partly symbolic. I've started dating again recently, slowly, no rush attached to any of it. The woman I've been spending time with knows the broad outline of what happened, and she's mentioned more than once how unusual it is that I don't carry visible anger when the topic comes up in conversation. I'm not angry, not anymore. I got my answers before I needed to ask a single question out loud. I got my exit on my own terms, planned quietly while everyone assumed I was oblivious. And I got to watch her walk directly into consequences she built entirely for herself. one quiet decision at a time, without me ever once having to raise my voice.